This is the second part of your lesson for ancient book forms. Remember, we began doing a kind of a code from another language, and we are transcribing it, not translating it, but transcribing it into a different text from another language. Well, now this part of it is that we're going to make an ancient book form. Before books were really refined and invented as this thing that could open up, um, and that was hinged on one side, they had all kinds of different ways of recording and then communicating information and sending it. And so, what we're beginning here to look at is some wedged shaped writing called cuneiform, and they stamped those wedge shaped letters, or whatever you want to call them, those symbols, into clay and then let it dry. Sometimes, sometimes different cultures would use stone as well, but this is kind of like your earliest tablet, if you want to think of it that way. We'll talk more about tablets now. This is a Roman, also the Greeks used a little bit of this. These are tablets, made of wood, but they, in the inside of it, they would pour beeswax and carve in the beeswax. They'd use these in school even, and then they would just rub it down and reuse it until the wax wore out, or they just need to put some more in. So that makes kind of our iPads look amazing as tablets these days, but those can be kind of cool. Now, it does look kind of like a book because it has some hinges there. You might think about doing something like this for your project, and then that quote that you transcribed could be written in the wax. You could use candle wax. You could make those tablets out of cardboard and then put the wax in, just to keep it cheap, and try to make it look cool. You could watercolor it, kind of burnish the edges so it looks old. I'd like it to look ancient somehow, if we can manage that. This is an ancient book form from Africa. It's bamboo, and you can see that they're writing. They would read it as they rotated this, and then there are others like it too that I don't have pictures of, that were written on bone. So like a long femur from a cow or something that they would write on with different inks or dyes. So you could think about doing something like this for your book project and writing your script on that. Now we're going to go to China with what they used to use. These were called slips, and they were bamboo, pieces of bamboo that they sewed together, and then they would roll them up sometimes, but they would write on each board or each slip and tell a story that way, and they would draw some great pictures, sometimes very stylized, cool writing, and sometimes very delicate, ornate details. But sometimes they were flat and they would just fold them. So that's a cool idea. You could do something like this with popsicle sticks easily, if you could find some popsicle sticks at home. Tongue depressors would work better, and I'm going to show you some examples at the end of this lesson, things you could do. What you see here is called the Magna Carta. It is a document in England that you could read about yourself. I don't have time to give you the history now, but they wrote the Magna Carta on, they didn't have paper to write it on necessarily. They wrote it on vellum. Vellum is a really, really thin, stretched out leather. So it could have been sheepskin or goatskin or something, and it's almost even translucent. You can see light through it when there's a light behind it. But this is kind of a lot of writing, but it's very calligraphy oriented. There's a lot of stylized. Like maybe artistically you're thinking, oh, that doesn't just look like a bunch of type, but they had to handwrite that. So please be sure that when you handwrite your text that you're underlining things so you can get them in a straight line, and then maybe you can erase that later. Try to make it beautiful and ornate. It's okay to put a little picture here and there in a corner to get our attention or something. I'll show you another example of vellum again at the end of this lesson. Here you definitely recognize that that's a library of scrolls, and scrolls weren't always on paper. I mean, you can see here, this is cloth. These are cloth scrolls. And so maybe you want to make a scroll, but some of those are really long. Look at the bottom left here. That big one right there. I mean, that's huge. If you rolled that out, it could be really, really long. So they didn't read them completely unrolled. They would roll one end while they unrolled the other while they read it. And you know, these probably have some really cool old mysteries on them, things that you could learn from these. But you could make a scroll just by getting some sticks and kind of making them look old and sticking them in the scroll. I'll show you another example of student work later. Here you go, kind of a, you know, roll it up on both ends is the idea, but there would be blocks of text that they would create. It's up to you to how much text you're going to use. You know, how much did you translate, or not translate, transcribe with your code for your project. Now, this is a library in Dublin, England. I just wanted to show you this because I got to go there one year and see a manuscript. It's kind of like a big page from a book, but it's independent. It has its own kind of artistic quality because it's usually painted. It was called the Cairo page, and it's world renowned for its beauty. But you would have to look that up if you want to see a picture of the Cairo page. Get online and check that out. It's a manuscript. They call it an illuminated manuscript, and they're really beautiful. You could do illuminated manuscript. They were often done on leather, again, vellum. Now, what you're seeing here is called the Stele of Hammurabi. Hammurabi is the king sitting up there at the top of that, depicted there. And that thing is about probably 6 feet, 7 feet tall. It's rather huge and heavy. And it's lasted a long, long time, thousands of years. And they wanted it to last long. Why do they want it to last long? Because they had done oral laws. That means, you know, laws by word of mouth for thousands of years before that. And you know what the problem is with that is that people forget, or they twist the laws and they twist the ideas and they change things and they disagree. So why not put it in stone, in writing, and carve it there so that nobody can get confused about the laws? But what about the people who can't read, Mr. Kimball? Those people get read to by everybody else who can read. So you put this in the town square, so it's common knowledge and it's set in stone, literally, right? You could do a stele, maybe not this big, but we could get some plaster and you could carve into it, or you could find something like clay that you could form this, and then on the right side here you see a detail of the writing. You could carve that into the clay and then let it dry. We want it to look old though, like, you know, so we could stain it with watercolors or however you decide to make it look old. These look old. These are tablets found in England, but the writing is in Roman and Italian, right? So they're from Rome. Did you know that the Romans conquered England so at one point, and these were found as I mean, I don't know what the content of the information is there. You can see the holes in those though. These once kind of formed a book, and so I imagine there would be leather sewn through those holes to hold them all together like a small book, like they were tablets, but they were plates, layered plates that were bound together. Kind of a cool idea. You could find some flat wood and kind of just adapt that to your book form. This is another ancient book form called, well, I mean, it's a tablet. It was made out of clay, but it's a story on there that has been translated, and it's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. You can find that online too. You can still read it. I've read parts of it. You might not find it that interesting, but historians can get all kinds of information from these. Anyway, this looks really cool to me. I mean, the information is cool, but this thing looks really old and chipped up, and that's kind of the idea. So you could do this with plaster. You could do it with Play-Doh, I guess, if you wanted to. Clay for sure, and but there still has there's some straight lines in there, right? There's some things that the wedge-shaped writing even in there stamped in, and they've been able to piece it together and translate all of that. So that's kind of a cool example. Here we have papyrus. Papyrus came from, maybe you already know this, the Nile River. On the edges it's like a leaf, and they would make paper out of it. And so this is Egyptian writing, and it's a good example. It's probably a scroll. It's unrolled here so that you can see the writing, but the Egyptians had a lot of scrolls as well. Okay, so that is our last photo example that I want to show you. So next are some examples of things you could do in my classroom. So let me switch off my camera. Here is a scroll that a student made, a scroll from home. She found some sticks. Now, I would encourage you to find some cloth. Now, I don't want you to have to buy things for this lesson unless you absolutely kind of want to, or you can't find something. You can see she did her writing there, but she also kind of stained this and she burned the edges, and that creates kind of an old look. She stained it with watercolor. There's another one here that I mentioned earlier, and this is a slip, right? And the slip you sew together. These are tongue depressors. It's easier when they're bigger because we can drill holes in them without splitting the wood. And you're saying, what kind of writing is that? That is Braille. You know, it doesn't feel like Braille because Braille is supposed to be raised up and you should be able to feel it for a blind person. But I thought that was a really rather good idea. So good job on that one. You could roll it, you could fold it. There's lots of ways to do that. So it's up to you. Here's just a piece of leather, right? You could shape this. This isn't student work yet, but you could write on that with ink. You could trim the edges so it looked a certain way. A lot of times I've seen some really cool book arts where they roll it up and they include like a leather strap to go around it, and that's how you would send your message to somebody. You've probably heard of people using in history metal plates to write on before they had paper, and then plates would last a long time. So what I have here, our student began this project and never finished, but I have an engraver at school that you can use to engrave metal. Now if you don't have metal, I mean, who has plates like this hanging around? I do have some stuff like this that you could create, and some wire to create some metal plates. This happens to be aluminum. If you have metal at home though, and you think that we could trim it up at school, let's try it. You're welcome to do something like that. Now remember the tablet with the wax in it. That's an option. How about just an old piece of wood? Don't you think they would have written on wood? Now I have a wood burner that you could wood burn. Even the popsicle sticks could have been wood burned, but this is just an old piece of barn wood. It's made to look old. It's been burned a little bit. It'd be cool if some of it was corroding, because wood doesn't last nearly as long as those other things. But think about that. Don't go and tear your neighbor's barn up and tell your parents that Mr. Kimball said tear your barn up. But have permission and bring something like that if you want. That's a good cheap solution. And then another solution is, we talked about the stele of Hammurabi and how it was a column. You could do words on this kind of like that cylinder that we saw where you write around, you roll it and read it as you roll it, or you could stand it up as a stele and engrave this plaster around it. So I have some things at school if you want to try some things. I have clay, I have plaster like this, I have metal and leather, but I can't afford to just stockpile stuff like that all the time unless students occasionally want to pay a couple dollars for it. So you would have to take a couple dollars to the office and bring me a receipt to show me that that you've paid for it, and then I'll give you leather or plaster or clay or whatever. Now this is something I don't have in stock, and it is expensive, but this is truly, it's vellum. And in England, I got this in England, even until 1811, during 1811, they were still doing record keeping on vellum. And this was a housing contract. And you can see the really cool calligraphy on here. I'm not going to open up the whole thing, but it's got lots of calligraphy on there. And you could actually spend some time and read this and figure it out. It's all very legal kind of talk, but John Munton is part of the contract, Martha Sharp, and so this is kind of cool. I mean, this vellum is stiff stuff, but that's some thin leather, right? And this stuff lasts a long time. So I've given you some options. You know, ink is an option, wood burning, engraving. The plaster can be chiseled. I didn't mention that. You can chisel the plaster, and it makes a mess, but it's kind of a cool effect. You can stain this with your watercolor and chip the side so it looks old. So those are some options for you for your book form. And remember, you're writing your code on this thing that you're making, and then we'll display it in the hallway when we're all finished.